Hello, everyone. I'm Jon Oltsik, analyst at large, and welcome to the Cyber Security Resilience Summit. I'm here and I'm joined with two good friends and serial CISOs, Rock Lambros and Fred Wilmot. Welcome, guys, and please introduce yourself. Rock, you start.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everybody. At least it's afternoon where I'm at. Rock Lambros, CEO and founder of RockCyber. It's a cybersecurity and AI consulting company based out of Denver, Colorado. As John mentioned, kind of serial CISO before starting RockCyber, which we do offer virtual CISO services. So I've been doing that a lot. I was the CISO at a oil and gas company here in Denver, Colorado called Marquess Energy Partners. Thank you for having me.
Fred?
Hey guys, Fred Wilmot. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Detecteam, which is based in Seattle. It's an organization designed to evaluate and characterize your detection ecosystem. Prior to that, I was a CISO at an identity management company, a continuous threat exposure management company, and primarily focused on the same sort of virtual CISO engagements for some really special customers today.
Thanks, Fred. So let's begin, guys. I said Cybersecurity Resilience Summit. It's the Cyber Resilience Summit. So excuse me for that. And so let's start with that. Cyber resilience, kind of a buzzwordy term right now. You two guys are former CISOs. You're very active in the cybersecurity community. What is cyber resilience? What does that term mean to you? Fred, let's start with you this time.
Sure. It's gotten a lot of airplay for sure. I think a company that is cyber resilient has the ability to adapt and adjust to continuously changing risks and to endure disruptions and or service degradation to their primary business drivers.
Okay, Rock, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Fred nailed it. And to just kind of build on top of that, most people think that resilience is just an extension of cybersecurity, but it's not, right? It's more around building a culture that says we're gonna get hit, we're gonna get attacked, we're gonna get breached. We accept that fact. So let's turn the script on the attackers and stay operational anyway, right? And it's a paradigm shift for organizations to start thinking that way.
Yeah, I totally agree with what both of you said, but let me follow up and ask, is there anything new here? Because the concepts I've been involved with cybersecurity since the early 2000s. The concepts aren't new to me. So what do you guys think? And is there something new here?
I don't think so. I mean, honestly, I think for me, it's that fundamental mind shift of not the if but when, because we've built business continuity and disaster recovery programs, and continuity of operations plans, whatever you want to call it, and slap those buzzwords on it throughout the years. But it was always in the mindset of if, right? If that happened, then here's the absolute break glass in case of emergency scenario, and not from the perspective of when. And that factors into your business case justifications in your investment and whatnot. Fred, I don't know if you've got anything to add or disagree with me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think it's an old problem with a couple of new faces. And one of those being we've really tried to talk about how do we respond or recover. But what I think is new and different, given there's a lot of policy work, there's a lot of other things that have come to bear, is that there's this other thing about adapting to what's happened more than recover and beyond recover. I think that part is what's become more prevalent because it's the speed. The speed of business has changed a little bit, but fundamentally, our desire and our need for the ever shortening window of exploitation and compromise demands the same ever shortening window of our ability to adapt and respond in that regard.
Yeah, let me just bring up something though, because to me, what's relatively new and key on relative there is the focus on ransomware. And so I think ransomware over the last 5 years or so has really pushed the envelope here. So, Rock, let me start with you because you're still doing virtual CISO work.
Yeah.
Talk about the influence of ransomware on the whole notion and drive for cyber resilience.
Well, I think I constantly preach about not spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But ransomware, if any good has come of it, has prompted that notion of the not if but when, because right, it's been so high profile and so highly visible across just not the cybersecurity landscape, the business landscape, right? An organization of any relative size gets breached by a ransomware attack and ends up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, right? So that brings its profile up to that executive and board level, which has kind of prompted that thinking now, the not if but when.
Yeah, Fred, what did you go ahead? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I completely agree with that. I think if there is a good outcome from ransomware, Rock's nailed it. One of the other values that I think it's presented is that it's difficult for cybersecurity to align itself with business risk, really. But this makes it very easy for us. And the relationship and understanding of the technical controls, the processes, the methodology, all of that gets wrapped into a scenario like a ransomware. And turns out crime pays, right? It's been a very, very big couple of years for ransomware. So if you look at that from a business loss perspective, the numbers are pretty substantial. So I think it's taken a front office, position here for us, which really helps the way that we talk about it, both to the board and to, other executives.
Yeah, I'm glad you both mentioned the board and executives. So let me give you a hypothetical scenario. You're the CISO. You've been tasked with driving a cyber resilience program. What contributions, what input do you want to see from the board and executives? Fred, I'll start with you this time.
I think part of the first few things are that Rock touched on this earlier. Culture is a huge thing. The understanding of a culture that does require that level of adaptive capability also means organically the organization is prepared to do those things. Whether it's I go through business continuity planning, sure, but I have to actually test and validate those assertions, and that requires all my peers and key partners in the business to execute with us, and third-party risk has to be addressed with our core partners on our tier 0 services. So it's that alignment that I think Rock spoke to earlier. I wholeheartedly agree with, and it's the commitment to being able to provide a service delivery capability that does those things together.
Rock?
Yeah. So what I'm looking for from the board is, frankly, so I've worked with tons of boards over my career, and particularly my consulting career, right? And I have seen boards that ask really hard, messy, uncomfortable questions. And I have seen boards who have been afraid of looking dumb, right? Because they don't understand cyber. And so they haven't asked those difficult questions. Encourage your board to ask those messy, uncomfortable questions, because that conversation is crucial to not only just running your cybersecurity program, but also building out your cyber resilience program. And oh, by the way, if you're security professionals listening out there, don't forget, and I know, John, you kind of mentioned this in our rundown, don't forget the A in that CIA triad, which is availability. We do that all the time, right? We are so focused on locking things down and confidentiality and integrity to where we lose focus on the A, and we think that's like IT's job or DevOps job to keep the environments up and running. But I think from the resiliency standpoint, we need to own it. It's part of the job.
Yeah, you're reading my mind here, Rock. I was going to that next for the CIA triad. So availability, talk about, as a CISO, what's your relationship like with the CIO, and what kind of support do you want from IT ops, cloud ops, application developers to make this thing real?
Well, I want the support that they're going to get stuff done, right? That to mitigate the risks that we identify, right? So, and to kind of establish the cyber resiliency program. I mean, whether that means more resistant, redundant systems, whether that means, hey, just patch your stuff, which we all know doesn't work. The statement, just patch your stuff, doesn't work. But cooperation, but how do we drive that cooperation, right? By not going in with a set of marching orders and saying, oh my God, here's our risk register, or here's the vulnerability scan, dump it on their desk and say, fix it, right? We have to work with them. They have different priorities. They may be rolling out a new ERP project, right? So how do we support them in that, right? It's got to be a push-pull kind of a symbiotic relationship, whether you report to the CIO or not, right? And I don't care where you report to, right? The ultimate mission is to get it done.
Yeah, what do you think,
think
Fred?
I think I agree with that. And I think also the business risk part of this conversation is really about establishing the right goals together, right? And then working out a plan. I think part of what has been remiss sort of historically is that because resiliency doesn't become topical to multiple parts of the organization, it's viewed as an IT problem, right? Where operational resiliency is really fundamentally tied together, where the business process of, hey, you know what, I need my service to be available. That's nice, absolutely nice. What happens when it's degraded or there's an outage or my key providers happen? Here, can I still deliver service in what capacity? And those types of things, oftentimes find their way into policy, but rarely into execution or prosecution when it happens. So, that business partnership is super key, like Rock talked about. I also like a lot of the get really aligned with not just the goals, but the method for achieving those as objectives to do together.
Yeah.
So, pretty key. I think CIOs have also come to a bit of a confluence in the river where that's required for them to be successful now. So I think it's also very helpful for us to have some of the threats that we have today to drive some of that alignment.
Yeah, so now without it's on the same thread and without throwing people under the bus, what are the common bottlenecks you've seen? What are the common process breakdowns you've seen? So kind of a lessons learned from your experience of where cyber resilience, maybe interdepartmental dynamics get in the way. Fred, you start.
Sure. I think legacy, I'll say that word, is really where that starts, whether it's in process or it's in objectives or metrics. Legacy metrics may not account for, things like how do I anticipate or withstand a particular type of cyber threat that leads to resilience. Technology, oh, I've got, this is an age-old thing that we talk about. Rock and I talk about this. Oh, I've got 10,000 vulnerabilities. Well, sure you do. Yesterday I had 10,015. Which ones matter and why, and how do I relate those to something that matters from the business perspective? Okay. So it's a little bit of up-leveling some of the metrics around that. So people tend to fall down into the rigor of what they know to be the standard operational pattern. The other part is it's really difficult from time to time to understand the implications of decisions we make when not made at design time. So, it's that how long is the loop, right? Not whether or not I haven't run into a lot of this, and Rock can speak to this too, in his experience. I haven't run into a lot of the organizational resistance to change so much from the standpoint of business partners. I have run into there's just these things that exist that are hard rocks to move because of that, no pun intended, Rock. But fundamentally important for us to be able to do it. So how do you do that effectively from day one, to day 180 is kind of the biggest challenge I think people fall down into, is not when to take the small bite of the elephant first.
Yeah, and to kind of build on that, and Fred alluded to this earlier, like we look at cyber resiliency as like the tech part of the problem, but we can't talk about cyber resiliency without talking about operational resiliency, right? And that involves the people and the processes. And we can't build a cyber resiliency program without understanding how we're going to support that operational resilience, right? So again, it is getting aligned on goals, getting aligned on priorities. If there's backlog, technically speaking, to establishing kind of your cybersecurity, your cyber resilience tooling, system upgrades, whatever that case may be, going into multi-availability zones, multi-regions in the cloud, whatever that case may be from the technical standpoint, you can't begin having those conversations without understanding the operational resilience standpoint, right? Because that's what we're doing. We're supporting the overall organization's operational resilience. And that's where I see a lot of breakdown, right? As cybersecurity professionals, we love to focus on the technology because the technology is fun, but guess what? The technology is also easy, right? That's the easy part of our jobs. People processes not so much, but I believe it's people process technology in that order for a reason and not because they're alphabetical.
All right, so say you've achieved a level of cyber resilience, you go to the board, you go to the executives, you say, we've got this, guys, I've got this. How do you test that? How do you prove that you've actually achieved the goals and maybe uncover some problems you didn't find?
So I'll say there's two things here.
Go ahead, Rock.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Fred. You started.
No, go ahead, Fred.
Sorry, I'll say there's two things here. There's the way that people do it, and there's the way people should do it. And like anything else, right? What is your mandate for doing that sort of testing in the first place, right? Some of that can be compliance or audit-driven behavior, and some of that can be because culturally it's critical to the business, and you do it because you should be doing it. The first of that is oftentimes you'll see this tested in adjacent ways. You'll see pen testments, maybe you'll see threat assessment, you'll see a risk assessment, some of that external, maybe internal. Again, depending on what exists already from the standpoint of that legacy behavior, do you have teams or people to do that, technology to do that, or do you have to go outside? And the second sort of approach to that is really internalizing that in a real way. You spoke to maturity. This is really related to that. While you always need an external audit source, you don't need that as the primary method to determine this. So, part of the reason why, I left the CISO as a job circle and just do vCISO now in this business is to help solve that problem, at a larger level, because it is a hard thing to do, and it's harder without the context of the environment you're trying to support it in. So I think when we think about that, those are the primary ways you could think about how people test it. But the today model is, somebody might talk through how this works. Somebody might talk through the business continuity plan and say, oh, well, that might be this case or that might be that case. Maybe you get to recovery metrics. Maybe you get to, a point of recovery for that exercise, but you probably are not going to really get to the time it takes to adapt the response of a particular type of threat into your ecosystem to make it resilient in that way.
Yeah, and I think because when we talk about resilience, we're talking about kind of gradients of availability, right? Can we operate at 20% and still deliver service? Is it 40%? Or is it 60%? And if an organization tells you they know what that is out of the gate before designing the cyber resilience program, they're lying to you. So, I'll go a little bit more technical with it. How should you test it? Chaos engineering, break stuff, right? Break little things, right? And see how the system reacts. Because we're not talking about is it up or down. Am I taking one data center down and failing over to the next data center, right? Because a ransomware attack could cross data centers if you've got real-time replication happening, right? So chaos engineering, right? Which is, long story short, is the concept of break small things all day long to see how your system adapts and fix accordingly until you get to an acceptable level of degraded service, right?
So we talk a lot in cybersecurity about prevention, detection, and response. And so from a cyber resilience context, give me your quick thoughts on what comes to mind for detection or prevention, detection, and response.
From a cyber resilience perspective?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, so I think the prevention is having that mindset that you're not going to stop every attack. So prioritize, right? Get a good understanding of kind of your threat landscape. Try and predict to the best of your ability, like where those attacks will come from. Are you critical infrastructure? and you're more susceptible to a nation state attack, right? Are you a fintech organization and more susceptible to, um, an economy that is hacking for dollars effectively, right? That type of thing. So understand where your attacks are going to come from, and then harden those crown jewels. Like the fundamentals still apply. Understand where your crown jewels are and protect them. And then I think from a detection standpoint, we collect a lot of logs and often don't analyze them, right? Which is where I think, I know Fred is addressing that challenge, and AI is going to help a lot in that regard. And then from a response standpoint, a 300-page incident response plan is not going to help anyone. So keep it simple, stupid in that regard, and drill it. Drill it like you're a special operations soldier, right? Drill that until it is muscle memory for everyone.
I love it. I think the focal point that I would want to accelerate for organizations doing this testing well is going to be how quickly they can adapt. I know I've said that a few times here, but that everyone's familiar with the mean time to detect, the mean time to respond. Everybody's the mean time to recover any particular service. These are well known and, service specific. One of the interesting things is, change control. What does that look like? What is the frequency? How quickly can I get something, into my Terraform or pushed out as a configuration or defined as a prevention mechanism through my services that instantly apply what my weakness was in this particular case? And I think that timing and also the understanding of what that needs to be. So for this particular type of threat to my business, I have to have these mechanisms in place. Of those mechanisms, should something happen, then this is my response capability, and this is how quickly I can respond to that. So the testing part of that requires that to be a continuous exercise, as Rock talked about. So not on a quarterly basis, not because annually I have to, but regularly and culturally. Like Chaos Monkey is Netflix did a great job in breaking the industry into, I don't need to not break things in order for me to see how they fail. I need to see how they fail operationally in production. And I need to know what that behavior looks, smells, feels like. And this is very much the same. It's exactly the same.
So when I think of cyber resilience and ransomware, one of the technologies that's really kind of become critical, I think, in that area is the technologies around immutable backup. And so I'm just wondering if you share that opinion, and then if you do, what are you seeing in terms of people testing their backup and recovery? Because to me, that's one of the failure points that I've seen is people have these technologies, but they don't test them and they fail. So go ahead, Fred, you start.
Super good point. I think the validation of recovery is a part of your testing. Not just the validation of your backup is a terrific thing to do. So recovering, weekly from any of the, immutable truths that you have, super great. The other part of that is how much needs to be immutable truth data, right? Understand what data classifications really matter, where they matter, and make the tier 0 recovery requirements the ones for the absolutely unrecreatable data stream. So for ransomware, right, when a lot of that data is state-oriented, it's discardable. Critical data that is required to be both secured, stored, encrypted in transit and at rest, and also recoverable from a backup perspective, make sure you've limited it down to exactly what it has to be, and make sure that you can come back through and recover that on a regular basis, which will force other things to happen, as you know, and it's super healthy for an organization to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Fred nailed it dead on, right? And I have seen organizations literally test the recovery of a file and mark it good, right? Because it checks the box on their Sarbanes-Oxley control. And like to Fred's point, no bueno, right? Because when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, and now you've got to recover terabytes potentially of even tier 0 data, right? Your testing didn't test at scale.
All right, so I know we're running low on time, and so I wanted to ask you, our audience members will be IT people, they'll be security people, hopefully some business people. You have all the experience in the world, fellas, so what would be your recommendations, lessons learned for this audience? Rock, I'll start with you.
Yeah. Again, people, process, technology, right? Don't get wrapped too much in the into the technology until you understand the people and the processes that you're supporting. And I don't care if that's cyber resilience. I don't care if you're rolling out, if you're migrating from Microsoft 365 to Google. I don't care if you're deploying a new SIM, right? Don't focus on the technology without understanding the people and the processes that you're supporting.
Love it. The couple of things that I would add to what Rock spoke to here is that first and foremost, the risk is an organizational problem. And the way we think about it from an IT perspective, a CIO perspective, a security perspective, marketing, sales is all tied together. And so the construct that we have to talk about is how those things are relatable to one another. The explanation about how we test or validate those things needs executive leadership and driven through the actual value of that service to the company. From that, it's not a hard conversation to say, oh, well, when this service fails, these 5 other things happen. I need to figure out how to test that and collaborate with your business partners to do that. They all know the weaknesses, you know the weaknesses too. And the ability for you to gravitate towards a method to bring that up to leadership is way more powerful than, sort of trying to figure out how to distill that downwards. So feel like you're empowered, you're an owner of this particular problem, drive the risk upwards in the way that you understand the business and the context, and don't be afraid to talk about it, let alone test it as you see fit.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll paraphrase a little bit of what you said and just add my own thoughts and say that this is not a bottom-up problem. This is not something that you look at each technology and you say, okay, how can we make that more available? It's a top-down. So you're looking at your business services, and then you're thinking about what is the worst case scenario that could happen there. And that's where you start planning on your resilience. And as both of my panelists said, uh, it's not just technology, it's understanding the people and process aspects. Where will you put your people if there's a fire? What if you lose power in a certain region? So it really is a big exercise that has to be executive sponsored and has to have full cooperation. So with that, Rock, Fred, thank you so much for participating in the Cyber Resilience Summit. And that's a wrap.